How far would you go to find someone you love if the whole world told you to give up? Imagine waking up every morning in a mansion of silence, haunted by a single missing smile, knowing your brother vanished in broad daylight while you were just a few steps away. For 30 years, every heartbeat whispers the same question. What if I'd done something different? Tonight, you'll see how truth can outlast even the darkest shadows. One man armed only with hope, rage, and a promise he swore never to break will confront the lies, the heartbreak, and the impossible odds to reclaim what fate tried to erase. But pay attention. The real reward is not just reunion. It's the moment when pain finally transforms into triumph. And you'll feel it hit like a lightning bolt, right at the very end. If you think you're ready for a story that twists grief into glory, don't blink, because the dopamine payoff waiting for you is more powerful than anything you ever imagined. Eduardo Azevedo had everything money could buy, but he lived like a man carrying a hole in his chest that no luxury could ever fill. His mansion in Costa Azul was a true palace of glass and marble, with perfectly manicured gardens, an Olympic pool, a private movie theater, and a garage full of imported cars he barely drove. But here's the thing, all that wealth felt empty, as if it were just a stage set designed to disguise the truth he could never accept. Over 30 years ago, his younger brother Thiago had been ripped from his life on an ordinary Sunday at the park. Since then, Eduardo had built an empire in real estate, erected towers, bought properties, accumulated millions. But none of it brought back the blonde-haired boy who used to call him my champion. The pain of the past had transformed into a silent shadow that followed Eduardo through every corridor of that empty mansion, reminding him that some wounds don't heal with money, only with truth. You know those stories we hear about people who win at life but lose their soul along the way. Eduardo was a living example of that. He had power, influence, respect in the market. But when he closed his bedroom door at night, all that remained was the deafening silence of an unfulfilled promise. The promise to protect his younger brother. And if you've ever lost someone you loved, you know exactly the weight that carries. It's like walking with a backpack full of stones on your back. You can pretend it's not there, but it never stops weighing you down. Eduardo had learned to hide this pain well, but it was there, throbbing, waiting for the right moment to explode. And the worst part, he knew that until he discovered what had really happened to Thiago. That shadow would continue to defeat the light inside him. But truth, as the wise say, has a peculiar way of showing up precisely when we least expect it, and it was about to knock on Eduardo Azevedo's door. The house was far too large for one man, with 23 rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. Eduardo walked through the hallways like a ghost, crossing dining rooms where nobody dined, libraries where nobody read, and a grand piano covered by a velvet cloth that nobody dared touch since his mother Helena's death. In the main corridor, hanging on a noble wood wall illuminated by warm yellow spotlights, There was an old portrait framed in gold, a boy with clear eyes, a shy smile, and about 4 years of age. It was Chicago. That photo had been taken just a few months before the kidnapping, at a family birthday party full of balloons and laughter that today seemed like echoes from another world. Eduardo passed by that portrait every single day, and every single day he felt the same tightness in his chest, the same sense of helplessness. Have you ever had that feeling that you could have done something different? That if you had turned your head 2 seconds earlier, the tragedy wouldn't have happened? Eduardo lived trapped in that mental loop. He had hired detectives, offered rewards that reached 7 figures, moved heaven and earth for years, but his brother was never found. Over time, the family crumbled like a house of cards. His father succumbed to alcoholism and died of cirrhosis at 60. His mother sank into a depression so deep that she spent her last years doped up on medication, and Eduardo locked himself in a cocoon of ambition and loneliness. The truth about Tiago's disappearance became taboo, a forbidden subject that nobody dared mention at the rare family gatherings, but one that Eduardo never, ever managed to forget. And perhaps that's exactly what kept him alive, the hope that one day, somehow, the shadows of revenge would give way to the light of truth. Think about it. How many people do you know who gave up seeking answers because it was easier to accept the official version of events? Eduardo wasn't that kind of person. He might be many things: ambitious, workaholic, emotionally closed off, but a quitter, never. And this stubborn obstinacy, this refusal to accept the unacceptable, was precisely what made him special. It was on a gray Tuesday in April when everything began to change. Marina Costa, a simple woman in her early 40s from the countryside of Porto Verde, had been hired as a housekeeper through the employment agency. Eduardo used to fill the emptiness of that giant house with faces that came and went without leaving a trace. Marina was discreet, polite, and worked in silence, exactly the type of employee Eduardo preferred. Because she didn't ask questions and didn't disturb his routine of endless meetings, million-dollar contracts, and lonely nights washed down with Scottish whiskey. But that afternoon, while cleaning the main corridor with a yellow cloth and a cleaning spray that smelled like lavender, Marina stopped in front of Tiago's portrait as if she'd seen a ghost. Her hands began to tremble in a way she couldn't control. The cleaning cloth fell to the Italian marble floor, making a dry thud, and she turned pale in a way that startled even Eduardo, who was passing by distracted through the corridor with his phone in hand answering client emails. "Are you all right?" he asked, more out of politeness than genuine concern, without even lifting his eyes from the screen. Marina turned slowly, her eyes wide, her voice trembling, and said something that would make the ground collapse beneath Eduardo Azevedo's feet. "Sir, that boy in the portrait. He lived with me at the orphanage." The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to suck all the air from the room, and Eduardo felt, for the first time in decades, that perhaps, just perhaps, the truth was about to emerge from the shadows where it had hidden for so long. His phone slipped from his hand and fell to the floor, but he didn't even notice. His heart raced, his legs went weak, and a single question echoed in his mind like thunder. What if this woman really knew his brother? What if, after 3 decades of relentless searching and paralyzing despair, the answer was right there in the mouth of a simple housekeeper he barely knew? Eduardo didn't know whether he wanted to hug her or scream, but one thing was absolutely certain: his life would never be the same again. And what Marina had to say could finally bring to light secrets that some would prefer to keep buried forever. If this story is already making your heart race and you want to see where this journey of truth-conquering shadows will take us, show some love by hitting that like button. It means the world and helps more people discover stories that matter. Eduardo couldn't move. His feet felt welded to the marble floor, his mind scrambling to process what Marina had just said. The boy in the portrait, his brother, his Thiago, the child who'd been stolen from a park 30 years ago, had lived in an orphanage with this woman. The same woman who'd been quietly dusting his furniture for 2 weeks, invisible as air, now held information that every private detective, every police officer, every investigator he'd hired over 3 decades had failed to find. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But the look on Marina's face wasn't the look of someone lying or seeking attention. It was the look of someone who'd just walked into a room and recognized a ghost. "Sit down," Eduardo heard himself say, though his voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Please, sit down and tell me everything." They moved to the library, a room Eduardo rarely used, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books he'd never read, furnished with burgundy armchairs that had never been sat in. Marina perched on the edge of one chair, hands clasped tight in her lap, while Eduardo stood by the window, unable to sit, unable to do anything but stare at this woman who might be about to change his life. "Start from the beginning," he said quietly, "and don't leave anything out." Marina took a shaky breath. Her accent carried the soft vowels of the countryside, the kind of speech pattern that marked people who'd grown up far from big cities and fancy schools. "I grew up at the Orfanato Snow Rafael," she began. "It's in Porto Verde, small town maybe 5 hours north of here. I was dropped there when I was 3. Don't remember my parents. Don't know what happened to them. That orphanage became my whole world." She paused, fingers twisting in her lap. It wasn't a bad place. The nuns were strict, sure, but they fed us, taught us to read, made sure we had clothes. But it was ... lonely. Always lonely. Dozens of kids coming and going, but nobody stayed long enough to really become family, you know? Eduardo nodded, though he didn't know, couldn't possibly understand what it meant to grow up without family. But he stayed silent, letting her talk, sensing that if he interrupted, the fragile thread of this story might snap. "When I was about 11, Marina continued, a new boy arrived. He was maybe 6, 7 years old, small for his age, with blonde hair and these big, scared eyes. The nuns called him Daniel. Eduardo's breath caught. Daniel. Marina nodded. Daniel Costa. That's the name on his papers. But here's the thing. That boy, from day one, insisted that wasn't his real name. He told anyone who'd listen that his name was Tiago, that he came from a big house with gardens and a piano, that he had an older brother who called him my champion and promised to find him. The room tilted. Eduardo gripped the window frame to steady himself. What else? His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. What else did he say? Marina's eyes were wet now, reflecting the afternoon light filtering through the curtains. He talked about that brother all the time. Said his brother was tall, had dark hair, always wore a watch, a special watch that had belonged to their grandfather. He drew pictures constantly, pictures of two boys holding hands, pictures of a big house, pictures of a piano. The other kids thought he was making it up. You know, lots of orphans create fantasy families in their heads to cope with the loneliness. But this boy, Daniel, or Tiago, or whatever his real name was, he wasn't fantasizing. You could tell. The details were too specific, too real. Eduardo's hand went automatically to his wrist, to the vintage Omega watch that had indeed belonged to his grandfather, passed down to him the year before Tiago disappeared. He'd been wearing it that day at the park. Had Tiago remembered? After being ripped away from his family, drugged or traumatized or God knows what else, had he still held onto those tiny details? Did anyone believe him? Eduardo asked, though he already knew the answer. Marina shook her head. The nuns thought it was trauma response. The other kids thought he was weird. I was one of the few who listened. He used to tell me stories at night about Sunday mornings with pancakes, about his mother playing piano, about his brother teaching him to ride a bike. He said his brother promised that nothing bad would ever happen to him. Her voice cracked. But something bad did happen, didn't it? Eduardo turned away from the window, faced her directly. 30 years of guilt, 30 years of searching, 30 years of wondering if he somehow failed to protect the one person who trusted him most. It all came rushing back with crushing force. What happened to him? He demanded. Where did he go? Is he still at that orphanage? Marina's expression shifted, sadness mixing with something else. Regret, maybe, or fear. He stayed at Snow Raphael until he was about 14, but grew up there, went to the local school, helped the nuns with chores. But he never stopped talking about his real family, never stopped believing his brother would come for him. She paused, and Eduardo could see her gathering courage for what came next. Then one night, there was a fight. Another boy, older, cruel, he told Daniel that nobody was coming, that his brother had forgotten about him, that he'd made up the whole story. Daniel lost it. Threw a punch, broke the other kid's nose. The nuns were furious, threatened to send him to a worse place, a disciplinary facility, and Eduardo's hands were shaking now. He shoved them in his pockets to hide it. Marina met his eyes, and in that moment, Eduardo saw the truth reflected there before she even spoke the words. He ran away that night, climbed out a window, disappeared into the dark. I was 13, watched him go, didn't say anything to stop him. The nuns reported it to the police, but ... She shrugged helplessly. He was just another runaway orphan. Nobody looked very hard, and after a few weeks, the case was closed. Daniel Orteaga was just ... gone. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush bones. Eduardo's mind raced through possibilities, probabilities, the horrible mathematics of lost children and cold trails. A 14-year-old boy, alone on the streets, could have ended up anywhere, could have become anyone, could be dead in an unmarked grave, or alive somewhere under a different name, or Señor Azevedo, Marina said softly, pulling him back to the present. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Eduardo nodded, not trusting his voice. Marina stood up, took a few steps closer, her cleaning uniform still smelling faintly of lavender and furniture polish. That boy in the portrait, the one you've been staring at every day for 30 years. She paused. Are you telling me that might have been Daniel Babu? That the brother he kept talking about, the brother who promised to find him, ... double quotes. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Was you? Eduardo's answer came out broken, raw with 3 decades of grief and hope and terror. You're saying that boy Daniel might be my brother Tiago, that he was alive all this time, just 5 hours away, and I never knew. The truth has a way of hiding in plain sight, doesn't it? Sometimes the answers we're searching for are closer than we think. Drop a comment below. Have you ever discovered something that completely changed everything you thought you knew? Because what Eduardo's about to uncover will shake the foundations of everything. That night, Eduardo didn't sleep. He sat in his study with a bottle of scotch he didn't touch, staring at a box he hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside were photographs, police reports, newspaper clippings yellowed with age, and a small red notebook with a child's handwriting on the cover, Tiago's adventure book. His mother had given it to the boy for his 4th birthday, 3 months before everything fell apart. Eduardo had carried that notebook with him through every move, every office, every mansion, a talisman of guilt he could unbear to look at but refused to throw away. Now, with Marina's words echoing in his head, he finally opened it. The first page showed a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small. The tall one wore what looked like a watch. Underneath, in letters his mother had helped spell out, it said, "Me and my champion." Eduardo's throat tightened. He flipped through more pages, drawings of their house. Their dog, Bruno, who'd died a year before the kidnapping. A piano with music notes floating above it. And on the last page, dated 3 days before that Sunday at the park, a sentence in careful 4-year-old handwriting. My brother promised nothing bad will happen, but something bad did happen, and Eduardo remembered every excruciating detail. It was May 15th, 1995, A Sunday morning so perfect it felt designed by God specifically to betray them. Blue sky, warm sunshine, the kind of day where parents pack picnic baskets and children run through grass with kites streaming behind them. Eduardo was 14, already tall for his age, already wearing his grandfather's watch like a badge of teenage maturity. Tiago was 4, blonde hair, still baby soft, wearing a red t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it. Their mother, Helena, had decided the family needed fresh air, needed to stop dwelling on their father's work stress and actually enjoy being together. "Let's go to Park Central," she'd said. "Feed the ducks, get ice cream, be normal people for a few hours." Normal. That word would haunt Eduardo for the rest of his life. The park was crowded, families everywhere. The sound of children's laughter mixing with music from a live band near the pavilion. Their father bought popcorn from a vendor. Their mother spread a blanket under a jacaranda tree, and Tiago ran circles around them with an energy that seemed infinite. "Watch me, Eduardo. Watch how fast I can run." And Eduardo watched, smiled, felt that warm big brother pride that comes from being looked up to by someone who thinks you hung the moon. "You're the fastest kid in the whole park," Eduardo told him. "Nobody's faster than you, champ." Then their mother asked Eduardo to go buy ice cream. The vendor was maybe 50 yards away, clearly visible, an easy errand. "Watch your brother," his father said absently, not looking up from his newspaper. But Tiago was sitting right there on the blanket, playing with toy cars, perfectly safe in plain sight. So Eduardo went, stood in line, ordered 3 cones, chocolate, strawberry, vanilla. The whole transaction took maybe 2 minutes, 3 at most. But when he turned back toward the jacaranda tree, ice cream cones melting in his hands, he saw his mother standing, saw her hand going to her mouth, saw her start to spin in circles like a woman who'd lost something vital, and then she started screaming. Tiago was gone. What followed was chaos. His mother running through crowds, grabbing strangers, demanding if they'd seen a little boy in a red dinosaur shirt. His father abandoning his newspaper, shouting Tiago's name until his voice went hoarse. Eduardo dropping the ice cream cones, watching them splatter on the pavement like small deaths. His mind unable to process what was happening because boys did unjust vanish from crowded parks in broad daylight. They searched everywhere, behind trees, near the ponds, by the playground, in the bathrooms. Park security was called, then police, then more police. Officers asked questions Eduardo couldn't answer. "Did you see anyone suspicious? Was anyone watching your family? Did your brother seem scared of anyone?" None. Nothing had seemed wrong. Everything had seemed perfect until it wasn't. They shut down the park, searched every inch, interviewed hundreds of witnesses. Nobody had seen anything. Or maybe they had, but in a crowd that size, who notices one child leaving with what might have been a parent or an aunt or a stranger wearing a friendly smile? The police found Tiago's toy car abandoned near the north entrance, the one farthest from where they'd been sitting. That was it. That was the only trace. one plastic toy car, and a little boy who'd simply vanished into air. The investigation consumed their lives. Eduardo's father hired private detectives, offered rewards, appeared on television pleading for information. His mother stopped sleeping, stopped eating, spent days staring at Tiago's empty bedroom like if she looked hard enough, he might materialize from nothing. And Eduardo learned what guilt felt like when it becomes so heavy it changes your DNA. He'd been the one watching. He'd been the big brother, the protector, the one who'd promise nothing bad would happen. And he'd failed. He'd turned his back for 2 minutes to buy ice cream, and in those 2 minutes, something or someone had stolen his little brother. Months became years. The police investigation went cold. The private detectives ran out of leads. People stopped calling with tips. The world moved on, the way it always does, because tragedy is only special to the people it destroys. Eduardo's father started drinking, not socially, but seriously, the kind of drinking that erases days instead of hours. His mother descended into depression so profound that medication couldn't touch it. She'd play Chopin on the piano late at night, crying silently, the same pieces she used to play while Tiago sat beside her trying to imitate the notes. Their home became a mausoleum of grief where nobody spoke about the lost boy, but everybody thought about him constantly. Eduardo threw himself into school, then business, then empire building, because work was the only thing that quieted the voice in his head, asking the same question over and over. Why did Unto protect him? He made his first million by 25, his first 10 million by 30, built the mansion in Costa Azul at 55, but no amount of success could answer that question. No amount of money could fill the space where his brother should have been. His father died when Eduardo was 32. Cirrhosis, exactly as everyone had predicted. His mother followed 6 years later, her heart simply giving up after decades of carrying weight it was never designed to bear. And Eduardo continued alone, building towers and accumulating wealth, while the shadows of that sunny May afternoon stretched longer and darker with each passing year. Now, sitting in his study at 3 in the morning, Eduardo realized something that made his hands shake. Tiago hadn't died. He'd survived. He'd been alive, growing up in an orphanage, believing his brother would come for him. And Eduardo hadn't come, not because he hadn't tried, but because he'd been looking in the wrong places, asking the wrong questions, following false trails while the truth hid just 5 hours north in a town called Porto Verde. The revenge Eduardo had wanted to extract from whoever took his brother suddenly felt less important than the truth he'd been denied. Because truth, he was finally beginning to understand, was the only thing powerful enough to chase shadows away. If this story is reaching someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been carrying guilt or searching for answers they thought they'd never find, share it. You never know who in your life might need to hear that the truth has a way of surfacing, even after decades of darkness. The drive to Porto Verde took hours, and with every mile Eduardo felt he was tracing lost time. Marina guided them through winding country roads to a small town where memories lived in peeling paint and fading sunlight. At the edge of Porto Verde, the orphanage appeared, a two-story building suffocated in weeds. Its iron gate rusted, the sign missing letters so it almost read as a secret language. It was a place time had nearly swallowed, but it was still there, waiting. Eduardo parked, heart pounding, staring at the old structure. Somewhere inside, the ghosts of his brother's childhood remain, waiting for someone to remember they existed. He and Marina pushed open the shrieking gate and walked past the neglected garden, stepping into a corridor thick with the scent of mildew and longing. Crayon drawings flung to dirty walls. Names were carved in the wood. Small assertions that I was here. Their footsteps echoed as they called out. Only silence answered, shadows dancing in the dim light. Maybe it's abandoned, Marina whispered, glancing around. Eduardo wasn't ready to leave yet. Too much felt on the cusp of revelation. Then a voice interrupted, cracked, decisive. This building is not open to visitors. At the top of the stairs stood an elderly nun in a faded habit, eyes sharp despite her years. We're not here to cause trouble, Marina said, her voice respectful. I lived here years ago. The nun studied her, then nodded. I remember you, Marina, quiet girl, good with the little ones. Eduardo stepped forward, his words trembling with urgency. My name is Eduardo Azevedo. I am searching for my brother. He arrived here as Daniel Costa around 1995. He always said his real name was Tiago. At the mention of Daniel, the nun's expression changed, suspicion becoming reluctant memory. She invited them to a small office, its walls covered in photographs, children immortalized by the lens, some smiling, others haunted. Slowly sinking into her chair, she said, Daniel was brought here by a woman claiming to be a social worker. All the papers matched our birth certificate, documents about adoptive parents lost to a car crash. But Daniel was terrified, insistent. He claimed his name was Tiago, described a family in vivid detail, a brother with a special watch, a mother who played piano. Eduardo rolled up his sleeve, revealing the Omega watch, once his grandfather's details, straight from his brother's mouth. He drew this watch, he asked. The nun nodded, pulling a file from the cabinet, laying out several drawings, two boys holding hands, a big house, a piano, always the watch. He spoke often about you, she said softly. I believed him. It's unusual. Children creating fantasy families vary in details. But his story never changed. Eduardo's hands shook as he took in the images. Why didn't anyone investigate? He murmured, voice almost lost. She sighed, regretful. We did what the papers told us. The woman Teresa Vidal brought everything she needed. Years later, I called the regional office. No one knew her. The reality hit like cold water. Tiago's disappearance had been orchestrated. Fake social worker, false identities, so he vanished from sight. Eduardo pressed on, needing every truth. Where did he go? What happened? Sister Beatrice's eyes softened. He was sweet but troubled. He clung to hope his brother would find him. The other children teased him, said he was dreaming. He fought, defended his story. Then, after an argument, he ran away at 14. Police looked briefly, but he was just another runaway orphan. I never saw him again. Eduardo's guilt welled up, nearly overwhelming. His brother had believed, had waited, and then had gone alone into the world. Sister Beatrice lay a hand over the final drawing two figures. A piano, a house. I kept these all these years, she whispered. He was special. He never stopped hoping. The truth lasting, stubborn, always fighting to break through shadows felt closer than ever. Eduardo, breath unsteady, looked to Marina. After decades searching in darkness, the glimmer of truth had survived. The shadows were lifting. If you feel the power of truth piercing through the darkest corners, subscribe to follow the next steps of this journey. The answers ahead will show that some promises never die even when buried for decades. Eduardo's hands trembled as Sister Beatrice slid a thin folder across the desk. Inside lay evidence that mattered more than any reward, detective report, or police file he'd ever commissioned. Drawings signed by a child desperate to be found. Marina leaned in, recognizing the paper crayon sketch of a large house, a grand piano, and two boys holding hands. In the corner, laboriously spelled in blue, read, "I am Thiago Azevedo. One day my brother will find me." The revelation was overwhelming. The lines and colors told stories the spoken word could never reach. Eduardo remembered how Thiago used to draw, filling the margins of school books with pictures of family and home. Here were the same themes, repeated year after year in a place that felt as far from home as the moon. The drawings weren't fantasies. They were maps, visual prayers from a child who refused to let go of hope. He left this the day he ran away. Sister Beatrice said quietly, "I kept it all these years. Knew it might matter someday." Eduardo pieced together timelines with trembling fingers. The date of Daniel's arrival at the orphanage matched the official end of the police search for Thiago. Marina recalled the day the news faded and Daniel arrived at transfer orchestrated with suspicious haste. Paperwork stamped, but hearts unmoved. The boy would talk constantly about Eduardo, their mother, the piano, the garden. Nobody believed him. No one could connect an orphan with a missing son from a wealthy family in another town. The system was designed for anonymity. Tears slipped down Eduardo's face. After all the years, every private investigator, each dead-end phone call, there'd been this evidence sitting in dusty folders, unnoticed, waiting. Marina watched her own memories resurfacing, lessons learned in the quiet heartbreak of the orphanage. Cheers for Daniel as he chanced small victories against loneliness. Sister Beatrice, frail but determined, explained that nobody cared about paperwork discrepancies. Overworked and underfunded, the staff just accepted they'd never really know the children in their care. Thinking hard, Eduardo asked, if he ran away, where did he go? Was there ever a clue? The nun shrugged. He fought with an older boy, left furious, and the police made a small effort to track him. But a runaway orphan wasn't a priority. They closed the file. She revealed one last drawing, a little different to boys, hands linked tight, looking back at a house. He always signed them Tiago in secret. I think he hoped this would guide someone to him. Eduardo felt the shape of a new truth forming. For years he'd fixated on revenge, blaming shadows for destroying his family. But pain had outlived anger. In these drawings, truth emerged, powerful enough to pierce the darkest corners of his grief. Even if the system prevailed in hiding Tiago, the boy's own words proved that love survives bureaucracy and lies. Marina squeezed Eduardo's arm, anchoring him the truth, delivered on crumpled paper, and ancient hope was ready to guide the next step. Sister Beatrice offered a final memory. He would say, "My brother promised to find me." Even as everything tried to erase him, he never stopped believing. Sometimes faith is the only light in a world of shadows. Eduardo gripped the drawing, heart burning with a new determination. Time had tried its best to erase Tiago, but the truth always finds a way. Stories like this deserve to be shared. If you know someone chasing answers against impossible odds, or if a simple act of kindness could change a life, share this episode. You might bring hope to someone lost in their own shadows. Eduardo's world sharpened around a single mission, following any trace of Tiago left in forgotten records and bureaucratic mazes. Back at home, he called in favors, hiring a team of investigators and a skilled arguments. They sifted through stacks of documents, from orphanage files to local police registries, searching for anything with a hint of Daniel, Tiago, or unexplained name changes. Night after night, Eduardo pored over computer screens, connecting dots between dates, signatures, and the words missing, transferred, adopted. It was slow, exhausting work. Every uncovered record revealed layers of shadows. Social workers retired, families gone, institutions closed. Still, new clues surfaced, a duplicate intake at another shelter. Some inconsistencies in the dates Tiago supposedly arrived. An old hospital record listed Daniel Tiago as a teenage patient admitted after a street accident. The boy was described as quiet, artistic, with vague trauma symptoms and partial amnesia. Discharge notes indicated no next of kin, and once released, he vanished again. The team tracked leads through different regions and city archives, piecing together a hidden history. They discovered registered adoptions, many perfectly legal, others suspicious. Some orphanages were used as fronts for illegal placements. Rich families sought children in secret, and paperwork was regularly lost. Eduardo realized the system was designed not to help, but to bury stories like Tiago's forever. One report referenced a young man named Daniel T. Seen leaving a clinic, carrying a folder of drawings his patterns repeated over years, proof that pain and hope left visible marks. Eduardo pressed for more. He visited the art caves in person, bribed clerks to access old files, scouring faded printouts for addresses or names. Frustration grew with each dead end, but at last a thread emerged. Drawings signed DT in the records of a small shelter in Santa Clara, a town 40 miles from Puerto Verde. The shelter's logbook listed Daniel Thiago's name-matching age, artistic skill, and an unexplained rehoming just days after he'd disappeared from Snow Raphael. But the trail went cold when the shelter closed, its residents scattered to new orphanages or released with minimal paperwork. Each discovery was bittersweet. More pieces fell into place, but the pattern was one of erasure, not recovery. The system had failed Thiago, each shadow cast by bureaucracy and indifference. It felt as if for every step Eduardo took, the truth danced just out of reach, retreating whenever daylight threatened to break through. Yet Eduardo was not alone. Marina used her old contacts and distant relatives to chase local rumors about the boy who drew pianos and two brothers. Sometimes she heard whispers from markets, from retired nuns, from former teachers. In one cafe, a woman remembered a Daniel who vanished without a goodbye, leaving only a crumpled drawing of home on the counter. He kept saying someone was coming for him, she recalled. He never gave up. It wasn't much, but it matched the pattern Eduardo was seeing everywhere. Exhausted but emboldened by each clue, Eduardo gathered the reports and timelines in his home office. As he mapped the journey, it became clear vengeance could never heal decades of loss. Only the truth, no matter how messy and incomplete, could bring closure and peace. The words and drawings left by his brother were beacons, not simply of the pain endured, but of the hope that survived despite everything. If you've ever felt lost in paperwork and bureaucracy, or found light in abandoned places, leave your thoughts in the comments. Each story shared brings us closer to truth and helps more people step out of their shadows. Late one evening, a call came from a number Eduardo didn't recognize. An investigator said, "We found something you need to see." Old hospital records revealed a teenage patient named Daniel Thiago admitted years ago after an accident. He had amnesia, but a talent for drawing. What he left behind were sketches of pianos, children, and two boys holding hands just like the drawings Eduardo cherished. At the hospital, an art therapist's note read, "Daniel struggles with memory but insists on a brother named Eduardo who he believes will find him." He even left a note with the address of the old orphanage, but a retired doctor recalled the boy saying, "My brother will come for me," he promised. Across institutions and lost years, Thiago's memory held on. He'd left a trail of visual clues, breadcrumbs of hope. Now, Eduardo is following that trail, piecing together a life shattered by time, driven to bring his brother home. Night had fallen by the time Eduardo and Marina returned to Snow Raphael, armed with lanterns and the address from the hospital record. They stepped through the orphanage's creaking doors, retracing the steps Thiago might have taken years before. The halls felt colder, emptier. Their voices echoed off peeling walls covered in old children's art and memories that refused to fade. This was not just a building, was a repository of lost dreams. They wandered into the dormitory wing, guided by Marina's intuition and Eduardo's restless energy. What they found stopped them cold. One wall, hidden behind broken beds and old lockers, bore the evidence of a desperate visit. Scratched into cracked white paint were hundreds of tiny drawings, pianos, houses, siblings, even the outline of a familiar watch. Eduardo recognized his brother's style immediately. Among the images, a message stood out, scrolled in blue marker. "I came back." But no one was waiting. The ache behind those words cut deeper than any document or detective's testimony ever could. Eduardo ran his fingers over the surface, tracing the letters, letting 30 years of regret and love pour into every groove. Marina began to cry, realizing Tiago had returned, seeking someone who remembered him. Here, where the system tried to erase children's pasts, Tiago had defied oblivion, leaving behind a record of hope, loss, and enduring love. They documented every detail, each drawing a clue. The images told a story. A boy who believed family would come for him, who had survived betrayal and loneliness, but retained faith. His pianos and two figures holding hands showed he still dreamed. His final words showed the cost of hope deferred. Eduardo swore quietly to Marina, "We can't let this be the end point." They would honor every trace left here, following the clues to the next town, the next mural, the next heart willing to remember. For Eduardo, the discoveries shifted something inside. No longer was his quest about vengeance. It was about restoration and recognition. As they left, Eduardo took one last photo: two boys, a house, a piano, and the haunting phrase, "I came back." But no one was waiting. The war bore testament. Truth survives neglect. Love survives years. In the darkness, Eduardo promised that next time someone would be waiting. If UVA ever returned to a place hoping for welcome, or discovered traces of someone who refused to be forgotten, share this episode. The more we remember, the brighter the truth becomes for everyone still searching. The next clue led Eduardo and Marina to Villa Horizonte, a small town where the morning meant artisan stalls, musicians, and the kind of quiet hope that only exists in places built on memory. The rumor came from a market vendor. There's a painter at the crafts fair who draws children and pianos. Says he grew up in orphanages, but he won't talk about his past. People called him Tiago Menezes, but older locals swore he once answered to Daniel, carrying stories in every brushstroke. Eduardo waited by the artist's stool, watching a man with short, trimmed beard set up a display of pastel portraits, brooding children, sunlight playing on tiled courtyards, grand pianos. There was something familiar in the way he handled the charcoal, pausing over each piece as if searching for someone hidden between lines. Marina, nervous but determined, approached gently. "Daniel," she asked softly. The artist hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty and an old pain. Marina continued, "From Snow Raphael, you used to draw pictures of a big house, a piano, and a brother who always kept his promise." Tiago's hand tightened around his pencil. Eduardo stepped forward, showing one of the ancient orphanage drawings. "Tiago," he said, voice carrying 3 decades of hope and longing. Something in Tiago's face broke, his eyes welled, his breath shuddered. Memories rippled across his features. A mansion, a lost childhood, a sibling's promise. For a long moment he said nothing, swallowing back tears. "I used to dream about that house," he whispered. "I always waited for someone to find me." Behind his stall, old canvases revealed a journey of healing and survival. Sketches of hands reaching, children watching pianos, messages in every corner. Eduardo and Marina pieced together Tiago's years lost between orphanages. A hospital shelter in Santa Clara, eventually eking out a living selling art on busy streets. Each painting told the story his voice struggled to hold. Truth fighting shadows, every canvas proof that hope endures. Marina asked if he remembered her. After a moment, Tiago nodded, hesitating. "You read stories at night, tried to protect me from the bigger kids." Eduardo showed him the drawing from Snow Raphael, 2 figures, a piano, a watch. The connection was undeniable. Tiago's hand trembled as he touched it. "I thought everyone forgot about me," he confessed. "That I was supposed to disappear." Eduardo explained years of searching, the family's pain, his refusal to let shadows win. Each detail matched favorite music, kitchen tiles, the Omega watch on Eduardo's wrist. The market vendor approached, handing Eduardo a painting Tiago had left behind as payment for a Mila house and 2 brothers, titled "Never Forget." It was the missing piece, the evidence that Tiago had survived by carrying love forward in color and form. The 3 sat together in the square until night fell, sharing fragments of memory and laughter amid tears. Marina spoke gently about forgiveness. Eduardo promised that vengeance was no longer his purpose. Tiago, now recognized by his art and his name, allowed himself for the first time to believe in reunion instead of just survival. If you believe that art can heal what time breaks, or that every search is a chance to bring someone home, hit the like button. You might help someone else discover a story that they desperately need to hear. The reunion with Tiago was raw and fragile. Eduardo arranged for him to visit the mansion in Costa Azul, the place that lived in his sketches but lingered as fractured shadows in memory. As they entered, Tiago's steps slowed each hallway, each painting a test against his mind's puzzle. Marina accompanied them, empathy bridging gaps that words couldn't fill. The atmosphere vibrated with anticipation and old grief, both searching for a way home. Inside the music room, dust clung to the piano cover. Eduardo paused, pulling back the velvet cloth, exposing ivory keys that hadn't felt a touch since Helena died. Tiago stared, transfixed. "I heard this in my dreams," he murmured, fingers hovering, trembling to recall. Eduardo encouraged him play something, anything. Slowly, haltingly, Thiago pressed familiar chords. The sound was hesitant, but unmistakable. It echoed the lullabies their mother used to play. Tears slipped down Eduardo's face, recognition anchoring both men to the past and present. Tiago toured the mansion, tracing the same kitchen tiles, breathing in the garden's scent. Snapshots returned parades of birthday balloons, laughter by the pool, the gentle advice of a brother always ready to protect. Medical evaluation soon confirmed what Marina and Eduardo already saw the years apart. The trauma and orphanage moves had fragmented memory, but every day together brought new recovery. The smell of baking bread in the morning, the clink of ice in whiskey glasses, the sight of a familiar painting goals. These cues guided Tiago back. One afternoon, Eduardo found a letter from his mother, Helena, hidden behind the piano. Her handwriting trembled with hope. If fate ever brings Tiago back, remind him the piano works, because love never forgets. He gave it to Tiago, who read it silently. For the first time, belief became certainty. The shadows that haunted them began to recede as sunlight filled the home. They spent evenings sharing stories, repairing a bond broken by time. Marina cooked old family recipes. Eduardo showed Tiago the garden he'd loved as a child. And together they rebuilt what the system tried to erase. Eventually, sitting side by side, they composed a new melody, one of forgiveness, a song that filled every corner of the mansion with truth. The trauma didn't vanish overnight, but hope was rekindled, stronger than revenge. Eduardo saw that memory, even battered, remained not as pain-blocking growth, but as evidence of survival. His own regret slowly gave way to gratitude for this second chance. If you've ever wished for reunion or found healing through shared stories, drop a comment below. Every journey back to memory helps others believe the impossible is closer than they ever thought. Eduardo had always believed the truth would bring peace, but now he understood it could also shake the very ground beneath his feet. As he dove deeper into the investigation, new details surfaced, uncomfortable, ugly. The final report was delivered at sunset. Teresa Vidal, a nurse once respected and discreet, had participated in a secret scheme that ripped children from their histories. She confessed under the weight of evidence, revealing how desperation, money, and a broken system had forced her hand. Eduardo listened coldly as she explained the night Tiago became Daniel's. Documents forged and memories erased. The harshest part wasn't hearing Teresa's tremulous admissions. It was understanding that greed, power, and fear had collided to form the perfect storm. The wealthy couple couldn't have children and paid for a solution. The system wanted quick results, so a social worker fabricated every detail. The intentions were masked as kindness, but reeked of control. Tiago was shuffled from foster home to orphanage as if he were a file, not a child pattern repeated for countless others lost in the tracks. Marina supported Eduardo through each revelation, reminding him that grief didn't mean surrender. Together, they reviewed the old notebooks, piecing together loopholes and moments when Tiago tried to reach back. It was clear hope had survived despite relentless attempts to destroy it. Eduardo's anger, once burning for revenge, transformed into determination, a vow to ensure such shadows never consumed another family. Instead of vengeance, he envisioned a legacy built on restoration. They called in experts, lawyers, even journalists. Eduardo provided them the files, the confession, the timeline. "Let's make the truth visible," he urged. "No more lost children. No more silence." Stories about fraudulent adoptions and missing kids made headlines, forcing public officials to answer questions long swept under old carpets. The media descended on Costa Azul, Marina by Eduardo's side in interviews, describing how the pain of one family echoed in thousands of others. Tiago, though shaken, watched with quiet strength. He spent time painting his art, now sharper, bolder, infused with truth, fighting off every last shadow. Eduardo saw in his brother the ability to transform pain into possibility. Their bond, once almost imaginary, became solid. Together they played the piano, walked the garden, spoke of a future where kids weren't commodities sold to the highest bidder. Late one evening, Eduardo hosted a gathering at his mansion. He stood before friends, family, orphanage advocates, and those curious for gossip and justice. Instead of bitterness, his speech was resolute. What happened to my brother was not an isolated tragedy, was a symptom of a system that must change. Today, we refuse to accept silence. We honor every child who vanished, every family torn apart, and we promise to turn our shadows into light. The applause was fierce. Friends and stranger alike were moved by truth finally shining through. Tiago played a gentle melody on the piano. Marina sat surrounded by children from nearby shelters, and for a moment the house brimmed with hope. But the fight wasn't over. Eduardo launched the beginnings of an idea, a foundation for missing children, dedicated to restoring identities and supporting orphanages. He knew Teresa Vidal's story would not be the last uncovered. Every bank transfer, every hidden signature had to be traced. Lives depended on no detail being ignored. He committed to work with advocacy groups, to publish guides for families, and to press lawmakers for reform. Yet it wasn't just about new projects or official change. It was about families around the world, late-night prayers for missing loved ones, and the conviction that the truth, when finally revealed, possessed the power to heal even what time had tried to erase. The story was resonating. Eduardo received messages from people inspired to seek their own answers, journalists eager to dig deeper, and others who, for the first time, believed reunion and forgiveness might be possible. That night, as Eduardo walked through his mansion, he paused at his brother's old portrait, a reminder that pain, guilt, and hope walk side by side. He understood now the path forward was built not with vengeance, but with compassion, not with fury, but with clarity and purpose. The truth wasn't just for Tiago or his family, was for every child lost, every parent who still waited, and every society torn between comfort and conscience. More than ever, Eduardo called his audience to action, not just as spectators, but as participants. Don't let this story end here. Share it, discuss it, demand better from your world. Shadows only disappear when we dare to turn on the light. If you know someone fighting for truth, someone still searching for missing pieces, now is the time to reach out. Your voice carries farther than you realize. Let's be relentless. Let's make sure every lost story finds its way home. This is your moment. Stand up, be heard, and refuse to accept darkness as inevitable. The greatest finale awaits, and it needs you. There are moments when pain turns into purpose, and the melodies of the past finally play forward, redeeming every fragmented note. The mansion in Costa of the for missing children and orphanages. The night of the inauguration was radiant, lights spilling through garden windows, guests gathering, anticipation building, hope roaring in every heart. Tiago stood quietly by the piano, his art displayed across the whole paintings of two brothers. Hands clasped before a grand piano, a logo drawn from memory into reality. Marina greeted children, advocates, and families from shelters all over the region, her voice gentle but powerful. Eduardo spoke not as a wounded son, but as a man transformed by truth. We made a promise tonight. No child will be left hidden in the shadows. Every story will be heard, every life restored. Applause thundered as lights simmered, and for the first time in decades, laughter overtook the mansion. What followed was pure magical dopamine rush only found in movies about miracles. Eduardo and Tiago took their seats at the piano. As their fingers danced across the keys, music filled the room with redemption and reunion. The first notes trembled, then soared, each chord not just forgiveness, but celebration. Spectators felt goosebumps. Tears welled up even in the hardest faces. For a moment, everyone was transported, a story of vengeance turning to liberation, shadows melting away as truth and love triumphed. Marina captured the scene on video. Two men once lost to each other, now reunited. Their music a promise for every child who'd ever dreamed of home. News cameras flashed, phones buzzed, and notifications exploded, a viral moment born. Young artists approached Tiago, inspired by the journey from lost child to celebrated painter. Eduardo hugged his brother, whispering, "We survived the darkness together. You brought music back to my heart." As the night unfolded, Eduardo encouraged the guests to become advocates, not just witnesses. The Foundation's first project would reunite families lost in the system, support shelters, and reshape laws. Children giggled around the cake, Marina's eyes sparkled with pride, and the piano kept playing a soundtrack for hope. But the greatest reward was collective. The audience, online and offline, absorbed every second. It was the culmination of pain, guilt, revenge, truth, redemption, and love. The dopamine was real, that cinematic high when everything broken is restored, when the hardest battles end in overwhelming joy. As the party neared its end, Eduardo turned to the cameras and spoke directly to those watching. His words crackled with promise. Behind every tragedy is a chance for new music, new beginnings. If this story struck a chord, if you believe every life deserves reunion and purpose, don't just watch, be part of what comes next. Like, comment, share, subscribe, but most of all, stay tuned. The truth will always win, and trust me, the next chapter in this journey is even more powerful than you can imagine. And in the final shot, the two brothers at that grand piano, Marina smiling nearby, the mansion was filled, at last, with light and music and family. The hunted shadows had become the very pathway to transcendence. You felt it, didn't you? That surge of hope, that call to transform pain into action. So do what you know needs to be done. Hit subscribe, invite a friend, and get ready, because you don't want to miss what's coming next. The reward is just beginning.